So, in your opinion, how can you get optimal training with limited resources? Like sometimes here we don't have resources a lot. So, how can someone achieve their optimal training with limited resources?
Yeah, limited resources. Yeah, good question. And that's a question that a lot of people ask themselves, whether they're sort of club programs or school programs that don't have a lot of like money or gear. And to give you an example, there's quite a few schools like in New Zealand and that, and we've just finished the Māori Cup, our school
Yeah.
championship. And there's a few schools that can hardly row because they row on the harbour in Wellington and it's just always rough, and there's always boats and there's always everything. So they don't have optimal training at all, but they still row very, very well. It's because their coaches, as we talked about before,
Mm-hmm.
have a great way because they've been in that environment of it being pretty shit weather,
Mm-hmm.
and the water quality not being great, that type of thing. They have adapted to be able to do a lot of stuff off the water. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where, in my opinion, as well, is you don't need to be rowing 24/7. And if you get the right programming off the water, which is okay, we're going to do ergs this morning or whatever. We're going to do, and I know it sounds pretty hard, but it's like 80 minutes. We'll do 4 20-minute pieces
Mm-hmm.
with some pyramid work or some rating work or
Yeah.
just increasing pressure work, that type of thing. That's where you can get your benefit in terms of your physiology. Okay, so
Yeah.
that your body's adaptation to your training.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can do that on the bike. You can do that by running. You can do that by a whole lot of exercises, like circuit training stuff. You can get great physical adaptation from that. And then when you do get the opportunity to be on the water, but at the same time on the rowing machine, it should be technical, should be focused on the hang, and really understanding the movement of it, so that when you get in the boat, you've got that ability to try and replicate what you were doing on the rowing machine.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's probably that is the one secret that I think a lot of people just don't do very well, is that they just are on the rowing machine because they've just got to do some time, rather than being like, I really need to feel this rhythm like I was in the boat, and
Mm-hmm.
your handles hanging out the front as if you were levering the boat past, no different with the handle on the oar, or you're sculling and you're pushing everything past and then it comes to you. The more you get that, the better you can be. And so it doesn't matter if you don't have, great equipment, or the water quality is really bad. You can do a lot off water, and you need to. Okay, you need to be doing it. And in our younger years, we used to do a lot of circuit stuff, a lot of running, a lot of biking, especially a lot of row machine stuff, and a lot of it as well is based around the fact that as you come through like your program and when you're younger, you have to train early in the morning, right? It's when
Yeah.
people talk about rowers and they're like, you're up at 5 o'clock in the
5 a.m.
morning, you're
Yeah.
like, I got no other time. You're like, I have to do it at 5 o'clock in the morning because
Yeah.
I've got to be study by 7:30, or I got to be at work, whatever. And so you just have to do it. Oh, Emma. Sorry, dog's barking. I'll just shut the door.
Okay.
People down. Never mind that. Our dog barking.
Okay.
Oh yeah, Oh yeah, it's just delivery outside. Don't worry about
Okay.
it.
All right.
Sorry. So
That's
we were
okay.
talking about we're talking about that training, the resources with that. I think that there's a lot of ways you can get fit. So you just need to be fit, and then you got to be technically fit as well. It's like saying to a cyclist, oh, you've been running 30, 40 Ks a day, but then when they get on a bike, they're not bike fit.
Yeah.
And so we've got to be able to do both, where you can get fit with like fitness and your aerobic capacity, but at the same time, you've still got to be able to get that technique stuff in, which is why the rowing machine and rowing is absolutely perfect, because you can get that without having to be on the water all the time. And then the water stuff has to be done very well. It's probably the only key. if you've got limited time, that limited resource, every opportunity you get to be on the water, you have to make it really good.
Okay. So how was your prepping to the Olympics? Is it any different than any other competition you've been through?
No. There's probably a few differences in terms of what's the word? In terms of the desperation, is that word? Oh, like when you're training normally, you're just like, okay, I'm trying to get this technique good. I'm trying to get it working.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas as you come towards the Olympics, you're like, this has got to be perfect. Like, we can't afford to be just having bad rows. We've got to really limit the number of bad rows versus good rows. Whereas beforehand, you could get off the water every now and again and say, yeah, it wasn't the best, but it's okay. And so working up to the Olympics, you're searching for clinical proficiency. Okay, so here's a great word for you: clinical proficiency. So you got to be so clinically good at what you're doing, so that every stroke that you take is repetitive and it's the same and it's very, very good. And that's the holy grail of rowing, is to be able to do that on repeat, multiple times, all the time, every day, every race, bang, bang, bang. And we got to that ability of being clinically proficient, where we could just replicate every race, every stroke was just about identical. And it allowed us to be fast. We had almost zero fade between the second and the third 500, because we were just so clinically proficient at our stroke, at the way that we knew we could make the boat run. And that's what you search for, right? And it just takes so long, and the effort and the time and everything to get to that point. So from each cycle, year on year, you work hard, you go for it, but at the same time, you're sort of experimenting, because you're like, well, if you're trying a new part of a technique, you've got to give it time. You've got to be like, right, we're going to really focus on the application of our power off the front. And you've got to train for it, and then you've got to race for it and see how it works. And if it works, great. We'll keep holding that. If it doesn't work and you go slow, you're like, right, back to the drawing board. Okay. And that's the thing with rowing, is that you try something in terms of your technique, and you've got to embed it into your process.
Yes.
and then you've got to test it out. And the only way to test it out is to like race. And then you've got to analyze it after that and say, was it good or was it bad? And then be like, right, what are we going to continue doing this, or do we need to adapt it? Change, no change, that type of thing. And so that's what the build-ups to world champs or World Cups are about, and you see it with crews, because a crew might go to the World Cup and not make the final, and then the next World Cup they come back and they make the final, and they're like, okay. And so all they've done is gone away and tried, and worked on their technique and their form, and they've come back and they've executed it with this new form, and they've faster. And that's really all it's about. It sounds so simple, but it's so bloody hard. But that's what gives you the ability, especially year in, year out, to be able to do it, and to a point where the way that I used to approach every year was that we were doing an 11-month experiment. Okay. And like rowing and most sports, you're just doing an experiment. So you're like, this is the amount of hours we're going to train. This is the weights we're doing. This is the makeup, blah, blah, blah. This is where we're going to go race, et cetera, et cetera. And we will try this, and this to get us to here. And then this is where the ultimate goal is for the year. And whatever happens here, it's like, was it good? Was it bad? Indifferent? Let's do it again, and that's rowing in a nutshell, right? It's like, it's like, okay, where's the national championships? And then you're like, meh, or whatever, and then let's do it again. So
okay. So you mentioned also in other interviews that you mostly changed Hamish and you a lot to get year after year. So you were unbeatable. So why would you need to go through the process of changing and you actually winning? Like,
Well, if I was in the position of the other crews, you're always trying to get faster, because if you're not winning, you've got to get faster, right? No, it's just what it is. So if you're the best, you can't just sit there and go, right, what we're doing is work, like, and what we're doing is working. It's fine. Yep, great. But if we stay where we're at and we just continue doing what we're doing right now, then everybody's going to catch us up. And then and then it's going to become very difficult.
Yeah.
So if we kept trying to evolve, or, as I said before, that clinical proficiency, then we're going to get closer and closer to being as perfect as we can, because you're never going to be perfect all the time. We're going to try and get as close to perfection as we can, so that we have confidence to know that we can win no matter what. And that's really what we search for, because at the end of the day, you know that you've got people trying to catch up to you. You know you've got people doing things in races. You're just like, Jesus, those guys bolted out of the blocks, to put you under pressure, to try and rattle you. And it started to work. People were staying in front of us for longer, that type of thing. So as an athlete, you've got to understand, like, how am I going to win this race? How do we think we can win this race? And you've got to sit down and you've got to talk it over with your coach and together and say, well, if we bolt out of the blocks, put a lot of gas there, yes, we're going to slow down a little bit later on, but do we think we've opened up enough gap to stop anybody closing that gap? Or you're like, you know what, we won't focus too much on the first 500. Let's really push the second and the third. Or you've got other people just like, right, we'll get into the race, whatever. But we've, in training, which is what we did when we were younger, is we really worked on our finishing sprint. So we're like, you know what, we know people are quicker out of the blocks. We think we can hold them in the middle. But you know what, when we come to that final sting in that last 500 meters, we're going to rate the shit out of it, and we're going to come flying back through with speed. And that's what we did in the 4, because we didn't feel like we had the explosive power out of the start, but we felt like we had that ability to really change speed towards the end. So there's so many different ways to win a race. And so all we were trying to do is say, well, we just think we can go across the 2,000 meters quicker than anybody else. If it means sacrificing a bit of time at the start, but moving through the middle, that's what you've got to look towards. And that's why, even going through in our process, if we keep trying to be better than we are, then it makes us quicker. It makes everybody else quicker. The average time in the pair increased dramatically when we were in the field. Everybody used to be like 6:14's the gold, like that's the world record. And so everybody was working towards that. And then, of course, when we set the world record, everybody's like, shit, we've got to work harder. We've got to work smarter. We've got to be quicker. And then obviously from there, the average time of the race has got faster because of that reason. And that's what it's there for. That's what records are there. They're meant to be broken. We want to see, well, I don't really want to see anyone break my record, but like somebody before you set a record, they set a legacy, and then you're like, righto, hopefully someone comes through and tries to go better, and that's all you can ask for.
All right. So would you have achieved what you achieved in the pair if you have rowed in a single?
No way. Nah. I used to enjoy the single. So just to sidetrack a little bit, if anybody does get the opportunity to row in a single, you've got to row in a single. Learning how to row in a single just teaches you so much about the sport, about rowing and what it's about, the effect that you have on the boat. If you miss the cat, the boat stops, it's like, oh shit, that was heavy. But if you can pick it up smoothly, you understand boat run and boat feel. If you let the blades just smoothly out of the water, you're like, oh, can hear the boat run underneath me, whatever, and if one gets stuck in, your boat's just like, there's no speed. And so I truly believe that everybody should be able to row in a single. I think that is the single is the ultimate boat, because it's just, there's no one else there with you. It's just you. And the fastest person is the person that's just technically the best, they row the best, they're fit, they're strong, and over the years you can look at it, and there's just been such a variety of people that have won in the single, some bloody giants that you're like, oh my God. And then you've got some guys that are quite little, you know, and they just row it very well and they tap it along and they're like, oh, they found the right recipe for them, which made them quick. And that's what rowing's great for, is that you can look at some people and everybody's like, you got to be a giant and you got to do this, you know, but lightweights used to hold some of the world records, you know, for years because they were just super efficient at racing and rowing in a boat. And you're looking at it going, well, how can a lightweight men's four who they're like 120 or 100 kilograms less combined than the other guys? And in terms of strength and erg times, they're like 20 to 30 seconds slower. How can they win? You know, how can they beat these heavyweights? But they're just so efficient, you know. And so that's the key with rowing, is that you just got to find that recipe that's going to work for you. And the single's a great way to learn and understand what your effect is on the boat, you know, rushing forward or like being too slow, you know, stopping at the finish, all this sort of stuff. You learn what your effect does on the boat, and then you as a person just be like, actually, I'll, you know, a few strokes here, that's it, boat's up to speed. Yep, I'm holding it, you know, and then you try something new and then you try and get the blades in real smooth and around the catch, you're like, shit, that actually worked really well. So then you're like, well, it works here. It works exactly the same if you're in a 4, double, 8, pair, whatever. It's the same philosophy. And so everyone that can row in singles, and majority of all the top people in the world can row singles very, very well. And, you know, I've raced singles here nationally, you know, against Mahe, who's, you know, undoubtedly one of the greatest single scullers in the world, as you've seen, you know, and I've beaten him a couple of times, you know, caught him off guard occasionally. 99% of the time he wins, right? And I try and he wins, and you're just like, fuck, you're good, you know. And so internationally, I think I could have been close to making a final, like at a World Cup. I don't know if I would have ever made it at a World Champs. But I definitely think I could have pushed like top 12. I definitely would have been in a B final. But the single for me, I like it. It was nice and I used it for what it was, but I just never had that passion to be like, yeah, I'd love to see how fast I can go in the single, because I wasn't the singular type person. I loved being in a team and I loved being able to do my part for teamwork. And I think that's one thing as well, is that even though you want to use it for training and practice and bits and pieces, when you know there's people that love being by themselves and you're like, you go in your single, pal, catch you later. But there's other people are like, I have more to offer as a part of a whole than I do by just being a singular person. And that was me. You know, I had the ability to work with people. I felt like when I was with other people and I was doing my job well, that we were always going to go fast. And that's sort of how it worked. And I think that's the case for most people, is it's very, very difficult to be that one person. And even mentally, like, I used to struggle when I was in the single, because I'd just be like, I wasn't very good in the rough. It was shit. And I'd be like left behind and everyone's rowing away from you. And you're just sitting there going, I'm trying my hardest. There's nothing I can do. I'm going slow. And you're just like, you know, and it's just in your head, you're just like, what am I doing? You know, and that's your mental toughness side of it, right? You're like, well, I'm not going to give up. But at the same time, I'm realistic and being like, I'm trying everything I possibly can. And it's not ticking any of the boxes. So I'll accept it. But at the same time, it's not like I'm giving up. It's just that I'm like, it's just frustrating. Yeah.
Okay. Who wins the race?
Which race?
Like, in your experience, who wins the race? Like, for instance, you said in an interview, like mostly in the Olympics, in the final race, all of you on the same level. But who wins the race?
Yep.
What makes the difference?
What makes the difference? Yeah, that's a really good question. I think what does the person the people that are prepared and ready, okay, and what I said before about that realistic expectation, the people that are there, that are ready, that know how fast they can go, that are ready to just give that 100%, you know, because there's no such thing as giving 110%, right? It's very, very, very difficult, like extremely difficult, to go faster than you ever have in a very high stressed environment like the Olympic Games, right? There's anxiety, there's pressure, there's like your demons are coming up and trying to pull you down into the pit of despair, like, you know, and you're just like, oh my God. And so it's not a great high performance environment because there's just so much happening and the stress levels are at another level and everything. And so the people that just do what they've done before are generally the ones that go out there and win. Okay. And through the process of the racing and the regatta, you'll find that it's not the person that's third in the heat, third in the quarterfinal, third in the semi-final that's coming out and winning. The people that are doing it are the ones that are consistently at the top. You know, yes, there's occasionally ones that step outside and you're like, holy shit, where did that come from? But it is the people that are producing the results all the way through because they know how fast they can go. Yeah. And they just replicate it. It's like, this is my technique, this is my race plan, this is fitness, everything. And you put it in your basket and this is it. And you have it out on and you lay it out there and you're like, we won the heat. And then you won the semi and you're like, all I got to do is do it again. You know, and you do see people that choke, you know, that like the situation gets too big for them. And yeah, I understand that. But predominantly the people that can back up races, that can do the same thing again and again and again, they're the ones that are, you know, there's a few that come out of the woodwork and that, as I said, but you know, you predominantly look at like if you went through any regatta results and you go, okay, they won the 4, right? And you'll be like, where'd they come in the heat? Oh, they won. Where'd they come in the semi? Oh, they won. You know, or they're second. You know, it's like they are the best people and they're the best right through. And that's just how it is, you know, and that's why as a person, when you're going into regattas and this is the whole learning experience or whatever, you know, if you're scraping by, that's when sometimes you got to like flip your expectations up and say, right, let's just make the A final. You know, like we're not good enough to beat them. They're 3 or 4 seconds in front of us. We can't find 3 or 4 seconds in a day. It's not going to happen. So let's flip up our expectation to be like, you know what, let's make that final. And then when we're in there, you know, we'll give it a nudge. But let's just be happy that we're there. We're part of it. We're part of the race. And that can even go right down to being like, you know, you turn up to an event and you're just like, shit, these guys are really quick or girls really quick. And you'll be like, we just got to make the semi. Let's just try and make the semi-final. You know, and that's where your realistic expectation has to come in from what you've done previously. And I've seen it too much, especially in our program, in that, you know, people, you see them testing and you see them racing and then they're coming over going, oh yeah, you know, really love to be there in that final. And you're like, you guys need to pull back where you need to be trying to, you know, compete. Yeah. And your biggest race needs to be the semi-final, you know, like, you need to be really trying hard to make it into that final. And predominantly you see it at some of the big events, especially like, the qualification year. So like this year, for example, love it. This year, I love watching racing at qualifying year. It's beautiful. The B finals especially are fucking humdinger. But the semi-finals are the biggest ones because you got people going, and if it was me, and we've done it in the past, is it's like the semi-final needs to be your race this year, right? Your whole target should be around, if you're racing internationally, your whole target is your semi-final. Because if you make it to the semi-final, you've got a chance at being at the Olympics. If you're not in the semi-finals, you got no shot. Okay, you're racing in the C and D semi, but if you're in the A and B semi, you're like, well, okay, do we target trying to make the final, or do we just row it over, and do we just because then you got, okay, we've got to get top 4 in the B final, right? So you've got all these people that race their asses off to make the final, and you're like, we're up against the 3 best crews and we've never beaten them before. Okay. So do you put everything on the line to try and beat them and get through? Or do you become realistic and say, we're not going to beat them? You're right. So let's just race it to the 1,000, have a good push. You know, we'll see where we're at, but we should put all our energy into that B final. And then you've qualified a boat for the Olympics and you're like, right, back to the drawing board. Let's make it better for next year. And that's what you have to have as a realistic expectation as an athlete, is sometimes turn up, go through the prelim rounds and go, shit, we've got to change our expectation of being wanting to try and win a medal to being like, we need to make the final. And I think that's what I think a lot of people miss, is that they have too high an expectation of themselves when they don't actually know what they're capable of achieving in the first place.
Okay. So through all your rowing journey, when you look at it now, do you think, was it worth it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. If I hadn't been doing this, I probably would have done some other sort of sport. But I feel like I'm 40 now, right? So, I got a bit older. But I really look at the journey that I had, and I was like, I had a fantastic time, loved it, able to travel overseas and did something that I enjoyed and loved, rowing. I was just like, I'll just see how, it started off when we had this, we had the conversation at the start,
Yeah.
just started off as like a bit of fun. This is cool. And then it turned into a bit more of an obsession. And then it just turned into like, shit, how far could I push this? How far could I see, how good could I be? And you're young, you're energetic, you've got no worries in the world. It's just like, I could do this until you basically start losing form, or losing speed, or your age starts becoming a factor in the equation of, could I get better? And I think you can push that right into your 30s. And I think it's a very, very individual choice on how long or how far you want to push it, to see how good you can be. But life's short, and too often you see people just get straight into the workforce and work along, and you're like, oh, yeah, it's good, but shit, you could be doing other things. And I think that's really it. You just got to make that choice of what you want to be doing. And I just really wanted to see how far I could push it. And we were lucky that we had a program here in New Zealand that was funded by the government. We were able to pay our bills. Even though we're not making money, but you could pay your bills. You had a roof over your head. It was like, this is great. And then at the same time, just do something you love, go overseas, race internationally, have a bit of fun, meet new people, travel the world a bit. And it was like, this is cool. And so that was really my experience. And I wouldn't have done anything any different, even to a point of, all the mistakes we made as young athletes and the way that we did it that didn't work. If you don't learn from those mistakes, like how you meant to get better, and it's just making sure you don't make the same mistake twice.
Yes.
And that's it. That's been the journey, and that's what's been the super fun thing about it, and I can sit here and talk to you about it and say, yeah, did this and tried this, and just share the experience to somebody else, so they can be like, well, okay, I just want to see, if people are doing it. One of my goals has always been, when I talk to people, is if they can do it slightly quicker than I did, because I look at it and I went, sort of took us 8 or 9 years to get some good results. If I could help someone get it in 4 or 5 years, and I think that's the thing, is you got to understand that it does take time, and it does take, a bit of patience and maturity to get to where you need to be. And it just, and that's what you've got to sign. If you sign in for it, you sign in for it, and you take the good, you take the bad, the indifferent, and just really follow that journey through.
All right. And how did it change you?
Crikey. I don't know if has it changed me? It's a really, really good question, because I don't know. It's sort of what I knew. It was just me. So my identity in a way is now fixed with the rowing side of things. And I think everybody needs to, in a way, identity shouldn't be your main goal at anything. You should be your own person and your own journey and your own process, whatever. And so for me, I just learned how to be a better person every day, right? Because the goal that I had was to be like, can I be slightly better than I was yesterday? Okay. And that was, even though that was rowing specific, it was also like, can I be a better person outside of this, like a better partner or whatever, better father, that type of thing. And that's all that anyone can ask for, is like, if you can just be a better person and be just not sweat the small things, and just really look at the overriding picture of everything. That was what I tried to do, and I think I did it very, very well. And to a point, it's like once you move on from this, you just taking a new shoot in a different career path, and how often have we seen it? You get friends or something and they'll go to university and they'll study finance or something, and then they're like, nah, don't want to do that. And then you're like, well, you just spent 4 years in finance degree, pal, and then now you want to go off and work somewhere else. You don't want to, you're not going to follow through with your finance degree. And I think that is one thing, is there's a lot of people out there that just do things because they think it's safe, or they just like, well, both my parents were lawyers, so I probably should be one as well, or whatever, a doctor. And so you go down that path and you're like, actually, I don't want to be a doctor. I'd rather be working in marketing or something like that. And that's it. So at the end of the day, you just got to be like, well, I'll try and be the person that I can and see where I end up.
All right. So that's it for me.